Welcome to the webinar. Our presenter today, Isabel Rimanoczy. Welcome to the webinar. Our presentation today is Developing a Mindset for a Better World. Our presenter is Isabel Rimanoczy. She leads the Principles for Responsible Management Education working group on the sustainability mindset. It's becoming clear for all, sustainability starts in the mindset. Whether it's called Sustainability Mind Shift, the Inner New Green Deal, or the Inner Development Goals, the handwriting is on the wall. Now the question is, yes, but how? In this webinar, Isabel will share the Sustainability Mindset principles, a scaffolding to guide educators and coaches in creating activities and interventions to develop the mindset that can shape a better world. Her book, The Sustainability Mindset Principles, is the first to introduce these principles, presenting educators with a framework that makes it easy to include them in teaching plans and lessons of any discipline. Written in a clear and practical way, the book provides examples, checklists, tips, tools for professionals and educators. It transforms the development of a much needed mindset for sustainability into an accessible, fun, and intuitive task. Dr. Isabel Rimanoczy is, as I said, the convener of the Principles for Responsible Management Education Working Group on the Sustainability Mindset. It's a network of academics in over 55 countries and cuts across 160 institutions. She has 15 years researching the mindset for sustainability and how to develop it. And Isabel is currently working on the Sustainability Mindset Indicator. With that, I'm going to shift the presenter role over to Isabel and let her show her presentation slides, and we should be good to go.
Oh, okay. So very happy to be here and very grateful, Ira, to your work, always such a pioneering work for education, a different approach to education for sustainability. And it's also lovely to see a few familiar names in the audience. So here is what I was thinking of doing today. First, I would like to give a little overview and then invite the audience into this conversation, at least engage your thinking. And then I will give a little description about why the mindset matters, which is, these are the questions that are always on our mind. Why should I be listening to this? What is it about? How will we do it? And so what? So I will present some definitions about the sustainability mindset, also a little history about the principles, how they came about and what for they were created. And most interestingly, I think for you will be to draw connections between what I'm sharing and your own context, your own practice. So to begin with, I would like to bring your voice into the chat. And that is for two reasons. One is for me to understand what is the context from which you are listening, and asking you to write into the chat what is a question that you would really like to have answered at the end of this session. That will help me get some orientation and make sure that I address those questions, but also helps you get some ownership. As maybe sometimes we sit in a session and we haven't really thought, what is it that I am really curious about? So I will give you this 30 seconds of silence so that you can write this question into the chat. Okay. I invite you also to take a quick look at what is emerging in the chat, because it gives us a picture about who else is in the room and what are the interests in the room. Okay, so here is where I would like to start. I am a while learner. That means that I always suffered in the classroom when the teacher didn't explain why something was important. And then throughout my life, every time I attended a lecture, conference, I always am asking myself, but why does this matter? So let me address this question right away in case someone is a while learner in the audience too. Last year at the Academy of Management, year 2020, it was the first time that I happened to hear the word mindset over and over. I must have heard it in 20 different sessions, paper presentations, PDW, symposia. And I said, oh, that's something new. Having been working and curious about the mindset of sustainability for 15 years or so, it was the first time that I heard it in so many different sessions. And I said, there is something happening. This morning, I woke up at 2:30 in the morning to attend a conference that took place in Sweden. And so in Swedish time, it was at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was quite earlier for me. And the conference was about the mind shift. And there were 1,800 people, so they say, that were participating, curious about how do we create this mind shift, the awareness that we need to accelerate this change of the mindset, but also the question how. So that is what was at the core of this event today, with a different group. They were not educators, there were many were practitioners and coaches and consultants. But what I found interesting is how this common thread. They were saying, well, to understand, address sustainability from the visible part, the technology, the regulation, all that is good, but we are not making enough progress until we don't engage the whole person. One presenter even mentioned that at COP25, it was explicitly stated that we need not only to work on the SDGs, but also we need to work on the inner transformation of the individuals, referring to the mindset, referring to having an open mind attitude, referring to having more of a servant attitude. It was all these invisible aspects of the mindset. And Donella Meadows, you may be familiar with this statement that she made a long time ago, where she was saying the highest leverage point to intervene in a system is in the mindset or in the paradigm out of which the system arises. So that is sort of a good starting point to see why it is worth to spend some time exploring this aspect. But what is it and how do we do that? Now I take a few steps back in time. that was the question that I was intrigued when I started my doctoral research. I wanted to know why certain leaders engage and champion sustainability initiatives and no one asked them to. No one asked them to do it. So why were they doing it? What motivated them, or what did they know that others didn't? And my intention behind that was to explore if there was something that we could intentionally develop. That was my aim. Is there something that just happened? Was a personality thing, or was it something that we actually could intentionally develop and replicate for a new generation of more sustainable minded individuals? So what I found was actually a number of aspects that could be developed. And then I said, well, if this is something we can do, how can we structure it in a way that these aspects become learning goals, learning objectives? My definition that I came up is that sustainability mindset is a way of thinking and being, which results in action for the greater good. It is the component of a broader understanding of our challenges, but also it is linked with an introspective attitude where we understand ourselves better. These are the deeper aspects. So if you're familiar with the integral theory, I like this, this matrix. It is called all quadrants, all levels. And I like it because it depicts in a very easy, very intuitive way, which is the area of the sustainability mindset. The focus is on the internal column, whether it is individual or collective. When you think at the external column, is what we can easily see. We see behaviors, we see initiatives, we see leadership actions at the collective level. We see regulations, innovations, programs, institutions. But at the internal level, the lower part of the iceberg, so to say, that is what we cannot see. And that is the column of the sustainability mindset. These are the values, the beliefs, the sense of purpose, the anchors of our identity. At the collective level, it's assumptions, worldviews. However, we address it from the internal aspects and we see it in action on the right column. That is where we see the mindset in action. So before I go into the content areas of the sustainability mindset, I would like to tap into your intuitive knowledge, into your intuitive wisdom. If you would say, what is one principle that you think should be part of a sustainability mindset? What would it be? Just think for a moment and write one keyword or one area that you think is essential, that from your intuition or your experience you think should be part of the sustainability mindset principles. Just type something into the chat. A few more seconds. There are no wrong answers because it will be based on your experience. So what are some components that in your perspective should be part of it? Okay, well, we have a few here. Critical thinking, care, humility, community needs, and ethic of what am I missing? Selflessness, honesty, trust. Where justice, integrity, I love it, system thinking. Okay, I think we are getting there. What I did is I grouped them into 4 content areas. These were the findings of my research. I grouped them into 4 content areas, and you will see that some of the things that you wrote into the chat really pertain into all of them. And the reason that I grouped them into these 4 content areas is because I was thinking, how can we organize these elements? Let's say we take your chat and say, okay, what are these classifications? How can we organize it so that we can think of it and operationalize them better? So the first one is the ecological worldview. And I would like to start pausing and saying, why is an ecological worldview important? Here, if you see these graphs, so much of our ecological knowledge is focused on disciplines, has a narrow focus. We have fragmented information. If you are an expert in water and engineering, architecture, and human resources, you will look at the information that matches your area of interest. There are many times, because we have this analytic view, we are unaware of the linkages. And particularly, it is a cognitive and rational understanding of the challenges where there is no space for emotions. Look at these graphs that I put on the screen. Definitely, they talk to our understanding, to our intellect, and much of our information, our knowledge base about the challenges, the environmental and social challenges, is portrayed in graphs. And this is unrelated to self. So what I found in my study is that we needed to incorporate this other side. From a narrow focus on discipline, we needed to complement it with a broader view. It might be more superficial, it's okay, but we want to have a broader understanding of the landscape. From a siloed information, we need to start connecting the dots. From an awareness of linkages, seeing the complexity, but also engaging the feelings and making it personal. And these 2 last points are essential, because when we talk about how do we engage individual students, leaders, we have to start bringing the whole person, not just talking to the rational thinking. There are 2 principles that are sort of gateways into developing this ecological view. One is called Ecoliteracy and the other is called My Contribution. The Ecoliteracy is particularly about getting this broad understanding and the understanding of the complexity and linkages, but also exploring how do I feel when I hear about that. And that is such an important question. It is one thing to know that 1 in 6 people don't have access to clean water, but that sort of doesn't connect with me. Yes, I know, I feel sorry. Yeah, my people have a problem. It's not my situation. I have my water here. I feel sorry for them, but also it's not something that is personal to me. So how can we connect this information and make it personal? How can we start exploring those feelings that are artificially separated when we learn those facts, and make a space for those feelings? Another one is my contribution. That is a very simple question. That is, how am I contributing to these problems? Not to the solutions. There is a lot about how can you contribute to the solutions, and that is wonderful. However, if we don't start seeing where we are part of the problem, then we lose that opportunity of seeing our power of our influence, because we have a choice in the ways we are contributing. But we have to go through that step of becoming aware of in what ways, and particularly getting used to that question. I wonder, how am I contributing to this situation? The next content area is systems perspective. Here again, let me start to explore why this is important. We are very used to our analytical thinking. We are very used to fragment reality so that we can deconstruct it and understand it. we are very used to have a quantitative approach. We want to measure, we want to have a control over the phenomena we are studying, and that has to happen in a quantitative way. At the same time, this is something that has been dominating our thinking for 500 years, right? So it is very ingrained in what is real science, what is wisdom or knowledge that we can respect. However, there is something missing, and it is not about denying again this aspect. It's about what is underdeveloped in our thinking. So, for example, by analyzing so much, we may be not paying sufficient attention to relationships. By having a dualistic thinking, we may be caught in a trap that doesn't allow us understand the complexity. You have heard it many times. Well, either the planet or profit, and I have to give a priority to my business because it has to be profitable. But these are false choices, because reality is not dualistic. Reality is complex. When we fragment, we can understand in depth, but we have to step out into the balcony so that we can see from afar what are the patterns, what are the flows, what are the feedback loops that we can observe. We have to step away for a moment in order to see that, so that we can see the whole again. The egg that I showed you is very interesting. It's a deconstructed egg, but unless we have seen it, what it looked before, we will have a very poor understanding what that egg looks like in its whole. And how do we incorporate it, a qualitative understanding, a qualitative approach to reality and to information. So here, within systems principles, we have 4. One is long-term thinking. What does it mean? It's not instead of short-term thinking. We need to develop more our long-term thinking perspective and embed it so that when we are analyzing information, it pops up like, I wonder, what would be the impact on the long term of this solution that we are thinking? Both and, a very important principle. What does it mean? We are very used to the either or, right? Either this or that, make up your mind. So, but there is more than either or, because there are plenty of situations in our day-to-day where we have to develop, we have to construct a solution that brings in different perspectives, that brings in different stakeholders' view, that brings even a perspective of the biosphere, that brings in the voices of the unborn children, 7 generations in the future. We have to start to develop a lens that includes this both and thinking. Flowing in cycles, we are very used to linear thinking, right? That is very easy to do planning. We like to have this linear approach. However, nature doesn't flow in a linear way, and we are trapped into this myth that we can have a perpetual growth, which doesn't happen in a limited planet. So our system calls for understanding these flows as nature flows in cycles. So how are we embedding this new habit of thinking into our decision making? And the last one, interconnectedness. Interconnectedness is a very interesting principle because it comes from system thinking. However, it is also very present in spirituality. But we will look at it from the systems perspective. That means that how can we start to seek what are the multiple relationships that are impacting our decisions when we are analyzing a problem. So these are thinking lenses that we want to embed into our day-to-day. The next one is the content area of emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence, well, you may know this is a very broad area, and it is not about the whole of emotional intelligence. I just grouped them into this category because there were 3 principles that were related, that fell into that area. And so I called it the content area of emotional intelligence. What is particularly that we want to develop here? We hear a lot of resignation. Well, you know, the things are like they are, the powerful are in charge. What can I do? These problems are too big for me to make a difference, as long as the people who created the problems are not addressing it, as long as politicians, government systems, organizations, the financial system, we have a whole scope of people that play a role that seem that is more important than our own, and that it is very easy to fall into resignation or despair or be just reactive, you know, just that is how I have been doing it all my life, or just be unaware of how we are part of the problem. Or also to have defensive responses, and some of you were asking in the chat about how do we bring leaders into that? How do we bring people that have maybe a more defensive attitude? So what we are trying to do here in this content area is to explore innovation. So when we are stagnated in resignation, what about innovation? What are the things that need to be innovated? How can we go from a rigid understanding of reality to exploring flexibility? Because resiliency is in flexibility, resiliency in nature is all about experimentation. How can we go from despair about a situation to explore adaptive responses? From a reactive, automatic response to pausing and being a little bit more thoughtful. Wait a moment. Let me think for a moment before I answer. From being unaware of how we are embodying a narrative that may not be the one we like, to be conscious about it. So much of what we are doing is unintentionally contributing to the problems, and we want to be more conscious. And from a defensive reaction, which could be even cynical. Cynicism is a defensive reaction, or I don't want to deal with bad feelings, so let me be cynical and say, you know, I don't think it's anything that I can do anyway. To become more insightful and more self-aware. So these aspects are addressed through three particular principles. One is creative innovation. What does it mean? We want to unleash the creativity that we all own, and maybe address the self-limiting beliefs that, oh, I'm not a creative person. Creative is my brother who is a musician, or is my daughter who is an artist. How can we face those limiting thoughts and tap into the creativity that we all have? Because whether we are preparing a party for someone, or we are experimenting with a PowerPoint, or we are doing some gardening, we have our playful creative sides there. We just don't recognize it the way, and we need to innovate in everything here. So our creativity, is very important that we tap into that and recognize it and acknowledge it. The second is reflection, and that reflection starts with noticing the pace, something that is a big issue in our times. We all live in a very accelerated pace, and you tell me, how can you be thoughtful and be rapid and speedy at the same time? So we need to first notice what is our automatic pace, and then allow ourselves to, maybe I should slow down and ponder this a little bit more carefully before I give you an answer, before I make a decision. So the reflection is intimately connected with first noticing our pace. The last one is self-awareness, which again is a big word, but particularly I'm referring to noticing what are the anchors of our identity. And this is a very deep issue. When I say what are the anchors of our identity, how important is for us success? How do we define ourselves as successful? What does it mean to be a loser, to be a winner, what does achievement or competition or being a winner, what are these meanings and how important are they for who we are? Because much of that narrative was automatically adopted, and many times we just haven't paused to think, well, you know what, I should define success again. I will tell you a very brief story. I was doing an exercise with students, and we were exploring these anchors of our identity. And one of them was achievement and wealth and growth. And at some point, this MBA student says, well, you know, I have a problem with this. Because if achievement and wealth and money is not a goal, then why am I doing what I am doing? And there was a silence in the room because the answer was not up to us. It was a question that he was asking himself. And that was a very powerful moment because he didn't have the answer, but it was the question that opened a space for him to look at himself, to look at his life and say, is this what I want? Later on, in one of the essays, he reflected, I started this course with a lot of questions about sustainability. And I have to say, I ended with more questions than I started. But these are the right questions. So maybe going back, we are very used to have a linear thinking. These are your questions. These are your answers. Next. Let's take care of this quickly. Well, maybe it's about pausing, about noticing what is our pace and opening spaces so that we can ponder, because then we are going deeper. This is the last content area. I called it spiritual intelligence. And why is it important again? What are these aspects that are in the domain of spiritual intelligence? We are a little bit trapped in a narrative that is utilitarian, that sees nature in an instrumental way. We, like Jan McGilchrist says in his book, The Master and the Emissary, the rational thinking should be the emissary, but it has become the master. We get a lot of satisfaction in consumption, in having. We are self-centered. Some cultures more than others, I have to say. There are cultural differences. But in our Western, Northern paradigm that has been exported throughout the world, there is a red flag that we need to pay attention to. And what is it that, and those left column aspects, these are only a few, there are more, but I wanted to put a few on the screen so I can talk about them. They are at the root of our unsustainable behaviors, unintentional, but that's the way it comes up. So what do we need to look for? How can we develop a sense of oneness with nature, which is an experience? How can we connect with our intuitive wisdom that is there, sitting there, but we just don't even know how to listen to that? How can we experience the joy in purpose, not just the satisfaction in consumption? How can we explore the being aspect to complement our having? How can we have an experience of compassion and empathy? How do we develop those? Because when we address these aspects, then we can have a little bit more of a balanced presence. And there are three principles that are the gateways, the path to develop these aspects. One is, as I said, oneness with nature. And that is an experiential one. We cannot lecture about that. The best way is find an exercise and say, oh, go spend an hour in nature and come back and tell me what you think. The second one is asking questions about purpose. One of the people that I interviewed in my study, one of my final questions in the interview was, what advice do you have for educators? And he reflected and he said, well, I wish someone would have asked me when I was in college why I was doing what I was doing. what the difference I wanted to make in the world. Because if someone would have asked me that question, I might have started my career 30 years before. And he, as a result of his midlife crisis, started to think about the purpose. But he said, hey, what if someone would have asked me this question when I was 20? I wonder what would have happened. And when I heard that, I was very happy because it's an easy question. I was looking for hints. What is it that we can do? And I said, we can ask that question. That's not difficult. And mindfulness, which is both a practice and a result. That is another way to get out of our head and have a more fuller experience at the same time, maybe not a cognitive experience, but a more embodied experience. So these are the three gateways of that are in the content area of spiritual intelligence. So I would like to pause now and just share with you what is the impact of that. And I am aware that I want to deal a little bit with your questions, so I will just share a very brief story. I was doing the first run of a course to develop the mindset, piloting it. I had no idea how it would go. And this was with master students in the master's program of hospitality and tourism at Dickinson. Halfway throughout the semester, I started to notice that the students were shifting their way of thinking. And they were thinking, well, now that I see what am I doing, I'm not happy with myself. I want to do different things. I don't know what, I don't know how. The first thing they were doing is they were talking to the parents, to the family, to the roommates. They couldn't just leave it with themselves. And that is something that I found over and over. I found it when I interviewed leaders, that I said, you know, I cannot be the only one thinking like that. I have to share this with my family, with my friends, with my colleagues. I felt it myself. When I started to connect some dots, I said, am I the only one seeing it like that? I need to share this with others. So by sharing, when we start to shift our mindset, we have this strong urge to share it with others. That happened today in this conference this morning. 1,800 people eager to say, is there someone else seeing this? Am I the only one? And as we find others, we create a nurturing and like a fabric where we feel supported. And we understand that out of this new mindset, new worldview cannot help but manifest in different actions. There is a question that I get many times, is how do you make sure that people act differently? And I say, well, there is no problem with people acting out of the current worldview, right? Why is that? Because the worldview is how we are and how we are in the world. Now, when we start to shift it, there is no way out of it. We just will be acting in new ways. We cannot help, because it is the worldview, it's the anchors of our identity that immediately comes up in how we relate to others, how we relate to our decisions. So it is a very interesting question that it just came to me a few weeks ago. I said, actually, we cannot help but act out of our new worldview, even if it is in a transition. So let me pause for a moment and ask Ira to come a little bit in as a support here, so that we start linking the questions that came at the beginning of our call, or new ones, with what is emerging here.
I'm with you, Isabel.
Okay, so looking at the questions that were posted in the chat, which are new questions that are emerging, or which are the ones that we would like to address?
Well, first, let me say that as those who have attended SCC webinars before, we do not unilaterally end at the top of the hour. We go until the conversation naturally draws to a close. There are a lot of good questions here, and they're all pretty much worthy of attention. But sticking closest to the theme of Sustainability Curriculum Consortium, I'll start with Doug Williamson's question. Can I use the sustainability mindset principles to see if my program is meeting a robust sustainability mindset curriculum?
I think the principles are a scaffolding. And the reason that I spent time trying to state these different elements as principles is because I said we need a scaffolding to approach this complex thing that has so many angles and so many dimensions of a mindset. Does it cover everything? I don't know, but this scaffolding allows us to have some footholds so that we can climb, so that we have ways to address these different aspects of a more complex issue. So it goes through the thinking, it goes through the values, the anchors of the identity. It goes about connecting our understanding of the challenges with our emotions. You see, there are many different entries. So I think that it is a very easy approach so that you can screen, actually, am I including enough the emotions? Oh, I don't talk a lot about my emotions in my program. How could I embed it? And there are lots of tools that I have been collecting and ideas where you find more in the book if you want. But we can also I can also follow up on an email if we connect later. That goes to connect with another question that is an action-based program from Anton. I think it's the same thing. Is if you take that framework and start to use it as a checklist with your own program, I'm sure that you will find that, okay, done this, oops, this one I think I could do a little bit more, and what are some ways that I could do it. In terms of large scales, and we are talking about application, there were some questions about achieving large scale and quickly. And I think after I talked about the quickly, you may already anticipate what I think about the quickly. We can have deep transformation, or we could have a quick fix. And we want to have a deep transformation, because when we talk about the mindset, we need, that is exactly the deeper transformation that we want to achieve. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to act slowly. I think we have to act quickly because we have no time to waste. So wherever you are, whatever it is that is your context, your area of influence, that is where you start to do things immediately. We cannot wait. Now, how to address larger systems. This morning, that was one of the polarities that was mentioned in this conference of the Mindshift. They were saying, how do we go for the individual, or do we go for the systems? And a lot of people were saying, oh, we have to work with the individual because individuals lead change. Others say, as long as the system doesn't change, why should it change? It's no sense to work with the individual. There's a principle, it's called both and that may resonate with you. We need both. Now, my question is, which is your area of influence? What is your area of control or influence? Is your area in policy making, regulations? Are you influencing a structure, organizational atmosphere? Then that is your way to go. If you work in training and development, in coaching and mentoring and education, then you're maybe working, your forte is at the individual level. You will work with the tools that you have, your talents, your gifts, and the tools that are helping you in that. I will pause so I can look at a few more questions, and Ira, you help me with that too.
Well, there's a grouping here that you might be able to address collectively. Hang on, it just bounced away from me. So, for example, Deborah Johnson asked, what's your opinion on the need to start the process of transformation at the top and that we can only change mindsets when leadership embraces the change. Similarly, Aaron was saying, to what extent can mindsets change? It would be good to hear about your experiences observing long-term mindset change. And I'll throw Ashwani's question in there as well. Which comes first or needs more influence, changing worldviews or changing behavior?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that we are looking which is the best entry. And I think it's contextual. It depends where you are. What it's clear is that one needs to be linked with the other. If we stay just at the action level and we don't use that opportunity to make sense, to make meaning, to explore the deeper consequences of our actions, then we will just stay at a very superficial level. We can use action and behaviors, project, working with students, I work with projects, because the project feeds back reality and reinforces the mindset check. But we need to make the space to reflect on this project. What is actually happening here? How are you feeling when you are doing this? Is this something that you ever thought you would be doing? How are you? How does this connect with the person you want to be? These are deeper questions. So using, as I said, the mindset is seeing in action. So we need that external part. It's not a philosophical reflection. One thing that I use the most are newspapers. Well, because we say the principles are something so abstract that it goes for any discipline. Well, it's not so abstract. Open a newspaper and tell me, where do you see the lack of long-term thinking? Oh, everybody finds something. Or where do you see that we are not understanding our oneness with nature? Open the news. And it's wonderful. We have it there every day. It's fed to us on a silver tray, ready for us to use as resources to connect these abstract things with the reality. There was another question about public and operating at the public level if we are not in education. Today I listened to a very interesting initiative of a community of the people that participated in this conference. They said, we are training 10% of the people in our community in listening skills, just in listening skills. So that's an interesting thing, because when we learn how to listen, we also learn how to interact in a different way. We develop empathy, we develop social sensitivity, just because we are breaking out of our silo, our preferred way of thinking. So that in a way is developing the both and thinking, oh, he is right and also am I. So there's not a one right person. So there are very simple ways, for example, establishing places where people can come up with their own ideas. How do they want to improve their community? Again, you start with the action in that case, but then build a place where they can also reflect on that. That way you get deeper roots into the mindset shift. I need to stop again. Did I address your question, Ira, the ones that you gave me?
Yeah, I think you did. I think you've actually covered almost all of them in one way or another, except perhaps Graham's question. And you talked a bit about it during your presentation, but if you want to elaborate a little bit more on the role of reason and or emotion in creating the sustainability mindset, that was Graham's question.
Oh, well, I wonder what is your context, Graham, that you wrote that question. In my experience, reason is the domain where we have all our conversations, and emotions, people are very uncomfortable dealing with it. I said, oh, if I start to deal with emotions, I don't know what happens. I don't know how to put the devil back into the box. You know, there is a lot of uncomfort. And I think there are ways today, that resources that allow people to connect with their emotion without having to have a therapy session. For example, one is the Visual Explorer. CCL, the Center for Creative Leadership, works with images, and they are online and they're free. You can access them. And you just say, pick an emotion, pick a picture that reflects how you're feeling after the conversation we have had. And we can have a very intellectual conversation about the challenges of whatever topic you are discussing. But then, what are your feelings? And pick an image. And that way, people, you allow them to connect with this other situation that they have living in their body, but it's not necessarily expressed. So that is why, and I want to address Deborah's question about, where is it? Oh, I lost again. Oh, about the start from the top versus, or where to start. I think you start where you have the leverage, right? And you start where you have the ears that are listening to you. That is where you get the highest impact with the least effort. Of course, if you want to re-educate someone that is well grounded in a very traditional narrative, it will be very difficult, very costly, energy efficient, not efficient. But if you start with some who get it or seem that are interested, these are your points of entry. And they may be young, they may be consumers, they may be leaders. You have to look at your context, but where are the cracks that you can bring some of that light, because that is where it will be easiest and it will have the highest leverage.
Well, there's one more, Isabel, that I see Ashwani had a second question, and this may be a good one to begin to wrap up with. How does the enterprise of shifting worldviews or mindsets as a strategy for societal transformation get around the fact of confirmation bias?
I don't know. I don't know. I need to give it more thought. I never thought of that.
Want to jump in and say something about that?
Maybe, yeah.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Isabel. Good to hear your findings. Really appreciate it. Well, really what I was getting at was, I teach undergraduate students, and I find most often that the first contact with the concept of sustainability is a class they take as undergrad. They've had no exposure to the idea. That being said, their preconceptions have already been established, right? So I'm in a county called Bergen County, which is quite conservative. And I would venture to suggest that the majority of my students grew up in a house where Fox News was the default news channel. Mm-hmm. They don't know any different. Mm-hmm. So it's not just a question of educating them, but it's a question of undoing the education they've had without thinking about it, and then giving them a new set of paradigms to put in place. So, right? So confirmation bias in the sense that our preconceptions will always shape our thinking.
Yeah.
How do you get around that piece?
I think, Ashwani, finding where they are, right? We have to start where the person is, because there is a very interesting correlation between our worldviews and what is our center of making meaning in terms of developmental stages. So if we are talking from the second floor, we make no contact. What are the points of pain or maybe of positive visioning of these individuals? What is it, the difference that they want to make in the world? Maybe I would look either of the downsides of the shortcomings of their current perspective, or what are the upsides that they are trying to get more of. And playing into that from the perspective, if you are familiar with polarity management, this is a beautiful framework, Barry Johnson, and you can look it up. It has a lot of resources that explores from every polarity, what are the upsides and the downsides. And normally we only see our upsides and the downsides of the other, as opposed to our own downsides and the upsides of the other. So it is about expanding our scope of consciousness. And questions, I think, are better than advocacy. Questions, experiences that are maybe like guided assignments. For example, write a conversation with an animal, which forces you to step in a playful way into the voice, into I wonder how a lion is feeling these days. No? And it is a playful way, but these things start to shift and shake a little bit our the places where there is a flexibility to be developed. But I like it. It's a very real challenge, but I think advocacy doesn't work. We have to come from another side.
Thank you. That's really on point. Thank you.
So Isabel, where are you going, Isabel, with the sustainability mindset indicator that was mentioned in the announcement?
Yeah, the indicator was another a project that I have been mulling over for many years, because you know what you don't measure doesn't exist. And I kept saying, well, if we don't see, how can we measure what is happening? So the thing of measuring was a concern of mine for a long time. So when I had to think what an indicator would be, I made a choice to convert it into a personal development instrument, because I said, what is the purpose? So what? What do I want? What is the practicality of this? Do I want to have a scale that is good for research? Or do I want to have something that is actually useful for the person who does it? So I said, I like that one, because we need a lot of acceleration of change. So the way I thought of it, I created this instrument, is that it is a map, and it maps and profiles where an individual is, but at the same time, it provides questions. It sort of validates where you are a little bit in the way you were thinking. Your students, Ashwani, for example, if a person says, yes, it is better to be clear because we have to give straight answers and we cannot be in the fog. That speaks about an either or thinking, right? So how can we see what are moments where that doesn't quite work? Had it ever happened to you that it was not so clear? Have you ever thought how this may be related to some unsustainability that we are experiencing? So it has a component that is informational, educational. It has a component that is providing questions, but questions that are respectful of where the person is. It's not this is wrong and this is right. It is this is good, this may be better. So understanding that we are in a continuum of development, and where we are is where we are making meaning out of our work. Maybe there are some places where it doesn't feel quite stable. So, okay, that means that we are moving on to a wider understanding or a wider level of consciousness.
Well, that seems like a great place to wrap up. Your presentation was fascinating, a great overview of the book, which I have read, and urge others to go out there and buy. If you got the announcement from SCC, there is a discount code, I should mention, that Isabel was able to arrange for us. So thank you, Isabel, for that, for a great presentation, and for getting everyone focused early on their questions. I may have to start doing that on every webinar, because it led to a very rich conversation, for which I thank all the attendees. Yeah. So thank you.
Ira, if you don't mind to copy and paste the chat for me.
Yeah,
and
I will get it.
Their emails, if there are questions that I have not addressed, I will be happy to send them to you. Also, if people want to write down my contact information there, I'm just an email away. And if someone is interested in the indicator, participating in the pilot, or knowing more, just drop me an email and we can do it.
Very good. And for those who came very late to the party today, yes, we are recording, and the link will be posted on the SCC website shortly. So
okay. Please write an email to me if you're interested in the pilot, because you may be putting it in the chat and I will not remember. So send me an email.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right, we will stop there. Thanks again, Isabel.
Thank you. Bye. Bye. Have a nice afternoon.
Goodbye.